Hello everyone, my name's Andrew Don. I'm the County Commissioner for Greater London North. I'm very fortunate to have in my county James Hatts. He's an ADC Scout. He'll tell you more about himself later, but he does some work for OSM and is my guru on these topics and matters. So I'm going to pass over to him. He's going to lead this session. James, I will, if I see any questions in the chat, I will read them out if they're pertinent. If I see a hand up, I will try and interrupt you as well. But if it's not super urgent and you can wait to the end in the Q&A, that would be perhaps more helpful for James. Okay, James, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. So by way of introduction, as Andrew has explained, I'm a Scout leader and currently an ADC Scout in North London Scout District. But for the last year or so, I've also been working as a freelance support agent for OSM. So when you submit a support inquiry for OSM, there are 3 or 4 Scout leaders around the country who answer most of those support questions and help people iron out any issues they're having. I should say that I'm speaking today as a Scout leader in London and not on behalf of OSM. Although what I'm going to say is informed by knowing the sorts of inquiries that come up time and time again in the support tickets, I'm not sort of giving away any company secrets or anything like that. But I hope that that what we're going to cover is useful. Now, OSM is quite a complicated product. And as we all know, every Scout group, every section is different and does things in its own way. So I think probably the most useful thing is going to be what we can explore in the questions, but we are going to cover a few things before we get to that. And before we start, we thought it would be useful just to understand from amongst the people in the room, how would you assess your own kind of skills and familiarity with OSM? And also, we're going to ask you in a moment which aspects of the system you'd particularly like to know more about, just so we can get a feel for people's interests this afternoon, and we can slightly steer things in the right direction. So in a moment, you'll see 2 questions on your screen. The first one will ask you to rate your own OSM skills and knowledge on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is beginner, 3 is intermediate, and 5 is advanced. And then the second question will allow you to tick more than 1 box. So you can choose multiple areas that you're particularly interested in knowing more about. So the first question you can vote once, the second question you can vote as many times as you like. So I'll launch that poll now. And hopefully you can see that on your screen. We'll give it a moment or 2 for everyone to cast their votes. Okay, more than half of you have voted now. Okay, I think that's probably the last few votes in. So let's end the poll and look at the results. So let's see. There we are. Hopefully you can see the results now. It's interesting, quite an even spread across the 1 to 5 scale, and lots of you reckoning that your current skill level is intermediate. And then looking at the second question, again, quite well spread across all aspects. Well, that's fine. We're going to talk about most of those aspects in this session, and we can, with your questions, we can go in any direction you like. So with that, exercise done, I'll just explain roughly what we're going to cover in the next 15-20 minutes. So this has been a very strange year for us all, and most of us who regularly use OSM haven't been using it in 2020 in the same way that we normally would, because we simply haven't had the usual cycle of meetings and camps and hikes and events. So if you haven't been actively using the system so much lately, there are actually a number of new developments, some quite big, some small tweaks that might make life easier that you might have missed in the last year. So I'm going to cover some of those first of all. Then we'll turn to some of the common pitfalls. As I say, OSM is a complicated product. It kind of has to be to meet the needs of such a varied assortment of Scout leaders, all with different ways of working. So we'll look at some of those ways where people often go slightly wrong, and I'll suggest some ways of avoiding those pitfalls. Thirdly, as obviously today's audience includes lots of people with districts or county roles, I'll say a little bit about how OSM can help you at that level. Then a word or two about other places where you can get help or and information and keep up with new developments in the world of OSM. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll tackle any questions that you might have. So starting with some of those things that are new in the last year. Probably one of the most significant are the at-home features that OSM developed very early in the first lockdown to meet the suddenly changing needs of Scout groups who found themselves doing scouting remotely, either over Zoom or in other kind of ways, sending out activities by email, whatever it might be. So if you haven't come across the at-home features of OSM, there are two parts to it. There's something called Badges at Home, which enables you to, as a leader, to set badge-related tasks for your young people and for them to upload the evidence that they've completed them, either as videos or pictures or documents, whatever it might be. You can either choose to open up all the badges that are in your section, or if you're a Beaver leader, you could open up all the Beaver badges all at once and let parents and families pick and mix. Or you could choose just to focus on maybe one badge at a time and to maybe drip feed things across many weeks or months and focus people's efforts. So this screenshot is of the Scout Artist Badge. As a leader, you can record a video introduction or upload documents to kind of set the scene or explain the task that you would like the young people to do. They can then upload things that correspond to that task. Optionally, you can allow members to see each other's submissions, so you can get a bit more of a community feel going rather than just a transaction between leader and young person. You could create a gallery that shows you all of the material for, say, the artist badge that members of your troop had submitted. So that's the essence of Badges at Home, I guess. There's a sister feature called Programs at Home, which is designed to be used perhaps in tandem with Zoom meetings or things like that for a Scout, for a youth section. And Programs at Home lets you set tasks and challenges that are not necessarily tied into the badge system. It could be something completely random, and in the same way allows members and their parents to chat about the task and ask leaders questions and to upload video or pictures that relate to the task. That's a new paid for.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have a question of where is the at-home feature?
So if it's not something that you've subscribed to, it does cost £10 per section per year. If you go to the settings menu in OSM and choose upgrades, you'll find the details there.
Thank you.
So I think that's one of the most significant developments of the year. And another one you might have missed if you use the OSM online payment system is something that will improve things for parents, particularly when their child moves from section to section. And if you're familiar with online payments using OSM and Go Cardless as the payment gateway, you'll know that typically in the past, a parent would have to set up 2 direct debits for each child in their section. One direct debit for subs and another for camps and activity payments. So imagine a parent with one child who joins in Beavers and then moves up through a scout group into Cubs and Scouts. That's 6 times over their child's time in the section, they might be asked to enter their bank details from scratch. Take a parent who has 2 children in a section, they might be entering the same details 12 times across the child's time in a group, and that can get a bit tedious. However, with the change that was made last year, a parent can now recycle an existing direct debit mandate for multiple children in multiple sections of the same group. So if they're paying all of their fees to the group from the same personal bank account, they only have to type their details in once. And it makes that admin process when a child moves from one section to the next, possibly just a question of the parent clicking twice to accept the new payment schedule when a child moves from Beavers to Cubs. It's 2 clicks for the parent instead of 10 or 12 or whatever it used to be. Unfortunately, this change doesn't actually make any difference to the amount of admin that you have to do as a leader, but hopefully, because it's easier for the parent, it will mean less chasing is needed because what you're asking the parents to do is less onerous. They're more likely to do it first time. So that's something that's definitely worth knowing about. Now, somewhat linked to the at-home features, it's always been possible for a young person, more typically a Scout or Explorer, to have their own access to OSM's parent portal. But in the past, there hasn't been any differentiation between what a youth member and their parents can do when in the system. Things have now been slightly tweaked, so it's possible for you as a leader to set different rules for what a young person logged into the system can do versus what their parents can do. Typically, the sort of thing you might want to avoid is young people being able to sign themselves up to an event that would incur cost for their parents, or give permission for themselves to attend an activity, that kind of thing. It's now possible for particularly our older youth members to be given a bit more independence, to be able to see details of the programme coming up and keep tabs of their own badge progress. But that doesn't now come at the cost of necessarily giving them access to do tasks on the system that you might not want them to do. And so if you are subscribed to the parent portal, you can adjust the settings to control what young people can do. The important thing here is the warning message that you can see in the yellow box. If you do start playing around with these settings, you do need to pay attention to which field in the contact system you have the email addresses in. If you've been keeping parents' details in the member field, that can then mean that a parent would be prevented from making payments. You need to maybe do a little bit of tidying up of the fields you use to store the data in, so that a child's own details are clearly in the right fields and their parents' details are in another set of fields. So it's a little bit complicated, but once you've got that tidied up, you shouldn't have any more difficulty. Another big talking point in Scouting this year has been the new rules about risk assessments, and OSM has introduced some features to help you with that. If you use the activities feature in OSM to put in details of each game or activity you do, you can tie a risk assessment to that. You can also create a bank of risks and mitigations that are either associated with your events side of OSM. So you might have some risks and mitigations about cooking at camp that you might want to use in all of your camping risk assessments. You can kind of create those at the top level of the events feature and then pull those in when you're putting together your risk assessment about a particular camp. Likewise, if you have some standard elements of your weekly meetings, you can assess the risks and mitigations for those at the top level under program and then pull those in when they're relevant to what you're actually doing that week. In all honesty, the risk assessment features in OSM are a little bit limited. They won't suit everyone. The immediate question people ask is about sharing risk assessments between sections and between groups. That isn't something that can be done easily at the moment. I think that may sound like an obvious omission, but when you step back and think about how complicated it could potentially get if you did share things and then another leader in another section in your group edited something in a way that you didn't like or didn't match your way of running that activity, tracking all of those changes in a meaningful way gets complicated very quickly. So I suspect that's why the feature has been developed in the way that it has. Another big development this year was the announcement of a pilot partnership between OSM and Scout Headquarters. I won't go into this in any great detail because it's quite complicated in its own right. There are a few benefits to you as a leader, potentially, including being able to transfer some of your census details straight from OSM into the Scout Association census system. For the Scout Association, some of the potential benefits are to do with being able to see some very broad non-personal statistics to understand where our members are and how they progress through the movement. As it says, it talks about aggregated non-personal data, badge uptake, geographical distribution, that kind of thing. There's also an element of this partnership that involves, as a last resort, staff at headquarters being able to use some of the data in OSM to deal with safeguarding cases. Now, you may be instinctively troubled about granting that kind of access, but there was a video presentation a few months ago put on by headquarters about this, and if you have any concerns on that, I do recommend watching back that video because it will explain the kinds of circumstances that this facility would be used in. It's not something I've actually signed up to with my own group. We have talked about it a little bit, but it's just something to be aware of, and it probably gives you an idea as to the likely future path of OSM and the Scouts Association working together, which is something that a lot of people have been saying ought to be happening for quite a long time now. Just a few other things that you might have missed in this last.
Sorry, James, to interrupt you. Sorry, we had a question from Irina. Irina, do you want to come and ask your question? Oh, it's written in the chat. So,
oh yes, I think there was possibly a question about COVID risk assessments and versus sort of day-to-day non-COVID risk assessments. I think the question's been answered in the chat. What I've been talking about here is nothing to do with COVID-19 risk assessments. I'm talking entirely about the risk assessments you do in the normal course of running scouting. Just a few other things to be aware of that have changed. Lots of us obviously in scouting tend to run events that are more or less the same every year. Most of us will have a kind of district hike that happens every year in roughly the same way with roughly the same details. In the past, it used to be a bit tedious having to either type in all the details again or copy and paste last year's details into next year's event. There's now a button that makes that easy. There's a one-click button for copying the details of a past event and duplicating them for future use. A simple thing, but a real time saver for busy leaders. Another thing people have asked for years was the ability to mark young leaders who are working in a Beaver Cub or Scout section as young leaders. Previously, you could only identify them as being members or being leaders. Now that they've got their own category as young leaders, that's been introduced this year after a lot of demand. There's also a new chat room feature that you can subscribe to. I won't go into that in any great detail, but it can be used in lots of different ways for parents to talk to each other to coordinate lost property after a camp, for leaders to share pictures and updates from a camp or event in a kind of closed environment. It can be used on a patrol-based level. It can be used in lots of different ways. Something that's been added to that just in the last few days is the ability to run polls. And again, that's something a lot of people have asked for. You know, a lot of us often find we need to kind of ask parents or members, would you be interested in X, or which of these options do you prefer? And this now provides a way of running a simple poll among your membership. If you subscribe to the advanced email system add-on, for a long time you've been able to track the delivery and opening of emails sent via OSM, but you can now track, if you wish, how many clicks there've been on any links that you've included in your OSM emails. Those of you who use systems like MailChimp to send mass email to your members will be familiar with this kind of tracking. It's now something that you can do directly in OSM. Now turning to some of those common pitfalls and how to avoid them. There are certain things that come up again and again and again. The first one is that for things to run smoothly in OSM, it's really important to get your term dates right. And a lot of people kind of have a mental idea that their term dates are only the times when they are meeting. For OSM's model to work, you need to make sure that all 365 days of the year are covered by a term. The fact that on Christmas Day you're unlikely to be running a Scout meeting is irrelevant. Christmas Day needs to be covered by a term for OSM to function smoothly. This is mainly because OSM uses your term dates to handle people's transition from one section to another. And very often you'll be doing that kind of administration between terms in the holiday period. But if you've told OSM that your autumn term finishes on the 15th of December and your spring term starts on the 10th of January, then things get very messy when you try and transfer members between those two dates. Personally, in my group, we set our term dates as kind of New Year's Day to Easter Day to the end of August, 1st of September to New Year's Eve. And if that sort of suits how you work, then something like that, you can't go far wrong, really. But yeah, a lot of people's OSM woes stem from leaving gaps between their terms or accidentally having their terms overlap, that can get messy as well if you have a date that is covered by more than one term. But if you make sure that term ends one day and the new one starts the next day, you won't have a problem. Something that I highly recommend everyone does, and if you take nothing else away from this, please think about doing this. Typically, OSM, because it's a grassroots up product, typically an individual leader has set up the OSM account for each section. I strongly recommend that you make sure that your section has multiple people with full administrator access. It makes it much easier if one leader is suddenly indisposed or leaves scouting in unhappy circumstances. It makes things much easier for handover, transfer, dealing with all kinds of issues. So please make sure that you're not the only person who has full admin access to your section. And remember that in a Scout group, it is the group that is the data controller, and the group really needs to have a kind of a grasp on what's happening and make sure that there's continuity measures in place if suddenly someone is unavailable, and it's something that's really important. Likewise, I think a lot of people don't realise that in GoCardless you can also set up multiple administrators for your account. A lot of people will have signed up. One leader will have taken the lead on signing up the group for GoCardless, perhaps a few years ago. At that point, you're just dipping your toe in the water. You're not sure whether it's something you're going to adopt. But 3, 4, 5 years down the line, GoCardless is a vital link in many groups' financial operations. You're potentially taking, tens of thousands of pounds through the system, and it's vital that you're able to control that.
Just mention something here, James.
Sure.
I'm Dan from the 21st Hammersmith. I had, at the beginning of lockdown, I had sleepless nights about collecting cash because of the census that's coming up, where we have to give just under £5,000, and we didn't really have that in our account, so we needed to charge funds. The easiest way that we did it was GoCardless. Anyone that knows me knows that I do not do tech. I absolutely hate it, but this was the simplest thing to set up. Yes, GoCardless takes a percentage of the payment, but it's so much more easier, and we've looked at it from an executive position, and it's just made our life so much more easier. And for the money that GoCardless take from each payment, it makes sense to just add that on to the payment anyway, so you're making nothing. But anyone that is a bit skeptical about collecting cash, I would wholeheartedly recommend it. It's literally changed our lives at the 21st and has made sleeping a bit more easier, especially close to payment dates.
Sorry, James, can I also ask, is this create user function, is that in OSM or in GoCardless?
No, that's in GoCardless. There's a menu where it says something like your team or your something like that, your team, I think it is, and then you can add more users who then have the same level of access to GoCardless as you do, or as the screenshot shows, you could potentially give someone read-only access just to keep an eye on it. But I would strongly recommend having more than one administrator. And I have come across one group who, the leader who initially set up GoCardless for the group, or for a section rather, set up a different GoCardless account to the one that the rest of the sections in the group were using, never completed the bank verification process. And it wasn't till quite a few years down the line that the group realized that they had a 5-figure sum that had never made it through to their bank account and had piled up in GoCardless. These days, these kinds of services are really critical to the operation of a lot of groups. It's really important to take these things seriously, so that, you know, if a leader does leave or is no longer available for whatever reason, that someone else can just pick it up and run with it. It's something that, you know, well, I'll say more in a minute, because it's pertinent to another point that's coming up. Census aggregator. A lot of people will be using that in the next few weeks to work out some of their figures. The first thing to say is that I strongly recommend, if you're using OSM to work out your census figures, that you do so on a laptop or desktop computer, not on a mobile device. That's because if you use a mobile device, the ability that you can see on the left here to filter by Lodge 6 patrol doesn't show up. And typically, in order to get your figures right, you will want to filter out the leaders, possibly filter out the young leaders. And you can also use the Lodges 6's patrols to manipulate the figures so that you get the right result in the case of members who might appear in OSM in your section, who are moving on, and you've agreed with the other leader they're being counted somewhere else, or all that kind of thing. You can create temporarily, say, a patrol for, you know, do not count, call it do not count in census, and then you can use the buttons here to filter out the do not count in census people, so that they don't appear in your aggregated figures. The other way that people go slightly amiss with the census aggregator is on the other screen, where you potentially see a list of members. Now, a lot of people will turn on the census aggregator, see half a dozen names, and immediately message support saying, why am I only seeing half a dozen names? And what people miss is that the secret to success of the census aggregator is trying to get the number of names showing down to 0. The people whose names show up on the census aggregator screen are the people for whom the system does not have census data. Once their census data has been completed, their names disappear, and they're included on the figures that you see here, with their ethnicity and disability details correctly broken down into the right categories. So yeah, if you click on census aggregator and see names, those are people whose data is incomplete. Parent portal access. Again, this is probably something that sort of started off as a bit of a kind of optional extra or nice to have, but is now something that more and more parents kind of expect automatically, with their experience of other organizations and youth activities. But it's important to remember, if you have, say, a Beaver Scout who moves up to Cubs, and the parents might have been happily using the parent portal in Beavers, they won't automatically be able to see their child's details in the parent portal after the child has moved up, unless the Cub Scout leader sends out an invitation email, or any parent portal email. It doesn't have to be the invitation link, and the parent clicks the link and logs in. And it's the clicking the link bit that is the important part of the process here. Just the fact you've sent the email isn't good enough. The parent has to click the link. Once that link has been clicked, that's what then joins together the parent's record with the child's record with the section record. It's the clicking the link bit that is the vital step in the process. Because of the sort of modular nature of OSM, which means that you can mix and match the components that you actually want to use, you don't necessarily have to pay for all the features. It's quite easy to end up with lots of small payments for parts of your subscription at different times of the year. Depending the way your group works and how you handle payments, that might be a bit tedious, dealing with, you know, £5 here and £7 there. You might want to consolidate the whole thing for all your sections into one single annual payment. And that's really easy to do. You just need to cancel any auto renewals that you have. You can then tick the components that you wish to pay for. Then they appear in this, this area here, what you've selected. The trick then is to click on upgrade other sections, and that enables you to quickly flip between all of the sections that you have access to, and you know, build up a shopping cart, shopping basket with all of the bits in, and then you can make one card payment, one bank transfer payment, whichever works for you, and then everything is nice and tidy in one amount. Obviously, some people might prefer to spread things out for cash flow purposes, but if you think, oh no, not another OSM subscription expense to claim, you can consolidate it into one tidy payment. Now, this is another constantly recurring problem. These days, more and more groups are using their own domains and email addresses with their own domain names, or even district issued addresses for all leaders in a district or county. OSM uses email addresses to identify people for access control purposes. There's absolutely no downside to continuing to use a personal email for the purposes of logging into OSM. It just makes it a lot easier to deal with all of the kinds of additional security measures that go with using any online service, let alone one that involves a lot of sensitive information about young people. If you are given a scouting email address by your group or district, it's much better to have one that's first name at or first name.surname at than one that says scout leader at or GSL at or DC at least for the purposes of controlling access to OSM. You might still want to stick the generic email address on your group notice board, so you don't need to change it every time there's a change of personnel. But for OSM access control, one email address per person is the way to go, because not only does OSM use the email address, each account can potentially have a mobile phone number attached to it for password recovery. You're also asked to set security questions that only you will know the answer to. So if you leave your role and a new person takes over and they're trying to log in on the same account, they will then potentially be asked security questions that they can't answer. And then there needs to get into a whole process of resetting the security details, and that's not ideal from a security point of view. There are things that can be done to solve it, but it's much easier if you stick to email addresses that are person related rather than role related. So far as I can see, there's absolutely no downside to allowing people to continue to use their own personal address for OSM access control. You can set the system so that all emails that you send come from, you know, branded official email addresses. It's just about the security of logging in, and I do urge you to look at that. Another thing that people misunderstand, as time's going on, I won't go into this in any great detail, but I will say that things get quite complicated sometimes, and people don't always read the instructions. If you're removing a member from your section and that member is also in another section, so usually it's the next section up, but it could also be a kind of specialist section like a jamboree unit or a gang show or something like that, who also use OSM, or a young leader unit who also use OSM for their information. If a member who leaves your section is also live in another section, you won't be able to see their personal details again. You will still see their attendance, their badge records, and other things, but you won't see their personal details again. That's explained here. So it's well worth making sure that you don't remove people from your section until you're absolutely sure that you have no unfinished business with them, whether that's with regards to payments or badges or awards or whatever. Don't remove them till you're sure that you have no further business to finish. A few very quick words about OSM helping you at district or county level. As some of you may be aware, it's possible for a district to sponsor the use of OSM, or for a county to do the same for the sections in its district. The main benefit of this is helping groups improve their administration and so on. But as a district, you do get access to a little bit of, again, non-personal details. And this is important for leaders to understand. If you're invited to use a discount code, this does not mean that the district commissioner or county commissioner will be able to see exactly what's in your OSM account. It doesn't work like that. The detail they can see is non-personal. It's all about very rough numbers. It's about badges and so on, so that they can see sort of trends across time, that kind of thing. But this is a scheme that lots of districts and counties use and works very successfully for them. There are basically two options that districts can pay for. There's Gold or what used to be called Gold Plus. However, some of the newer things that have been added this year, it's not possible to add them on to district or county code schemes, but there are some workarounds, and if people are interested, I can address that. If you are a district or county person and you your district or county currently uses the OSM district dashboard scheme, it's really important that you make sure that your district or county never runs out of credit, because as I was saying earlier, perhaps 5 years ago, OSM was a nice extra, but wasn't core to your day-to-day running. Today, there are many leaders who would be appalled if they thought that they were going to log on and suddenly find that their ability to email or text their members was taken away. And that's what can happen if you allow your district or county team, your county account to run out of credits. And unfortunately, sometimes we see that the people at district or county level who are responsible for topping up the account are not necessarily people with current section roles who understand from the leader's perspective quite how important this is, and that if an invoice for topping up the OSM account comes in front of them, they really need to make sure it's paid now so that people don't lose their access. And it does happen. There is an option on the district dashboard where you can set to be reminded when you're down to 5 credits or 10 credits or whatever figure you choose. But unfortunately, it happens quite a lot. And we get a lot of correspondence from irate leaders saying, where's my account gone? And we have to say, please talk to your district or county team and prod them and get them to sort it. A couple of words on where to get help with OSM. OSM has, as of this year, some support forums for users to help each other built into the system. You'll find them in the help menu. And you'll get help both from other users and from OSM staff. There's a third-party independent Facebook called UK Scouts on OSM helping each other. That's also a really good place to put your OSM questions. You'll usually get an answer very quickly. I'd also recommend liking the OSM Facebook page, as that's often the first place that new features are announced. So well worth keeping an eye on that. I've talked for much longer than I intended, but I'll hand back over to Andrew, who will hopefully lead us in some questions and wider discussion.
Yeah, thanks, James. That was really, really interesting. Some really valuable improvements to OSM. So I've recorded 4 questions that we haven't yet answered. If anyone else has any further ideas, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll field them to you, James. So the first question from Andrew Rush was, will events show up on the programme?
No, but I think if you look in the help forum on OSM, there's a new area called user experience improvements or something like that, where Ed, the owner and founder of OSM, is actively seeking feedback on a number of points. And I think that question, because the way a lot of us operate has had to change in the last year because of COVID-19, and the fact that rather than running our traditional section meetings where the default assumption is that all section members are welcome to turn up when they want, how they want. Because of number limits for COVID and permissions and all the rest, we've had to limit numbers. Lots of us have been using events for our weekly sessions in Amber rather than using the program side of things. So I think it's likely that, well, there has been talk of kind of merging the program and event features so that there's kind of only one type of thing, and then you can kind of set as an attribute of the event whether it's a open to all comers weekly session or a book now because it's space limited kind of thing. So I think there will be some developments on that front. I don't really have an inside track, but I think that there have certainly been public discussions along that line because the way that we all operate has changed, particularly this year.
Great. James, just before I ask you the next question, could you stop screen sharing?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So the next question has come up, 2 or 3 people have asked this. Are there any plans for any more features, particularly at group level, that might be worth keeping our eye out for?
I really don't have any inside track on that. Yeah, I mean, clearly there are things that could be done to improve the group experience. But I think it's worth remembering that the reason that OSM has got to where it is because it is fundamentally driven by the needs of the section leader, and it wouldn't have been adopted to the point that it has if it wasn't really focused on that. And groups are so different in how they operate. You know, we all know that there are some groups where the sections work very closely together, and some where the sections are very clearly independent fiefdoms. It's quite difficult to do things that are one size fits all, but that's absolutely not an official answer.
Okay, thank you. Next question came from Ian Hardy. When you were talking about administrators for sections and information and payments, I think, should the DESA and the desk be administrators for all Explorer Scout units in districts?
I mean,
good question.
I mean, really, it's entirely up to local decision. There's, in terms of Explorer Scout sections, obviously those are the responsibility of the district. So therefore, logically, it's something that the district needs to kind of have a view on amongst themselves. However, on a practical level, you probably need to proceed carefully because it's very easy to upset people by, by kind of making demands for data or information or access or whatever. But in a district, it would probably make sense for desks and administrators to have that kind of access, but no one except you in the district can decide that.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from a fellow County Commissioner, Richard Williams. Is there a way to get dashboard data values downloaded to a spreadsheet?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you. And then we've got some more coming in now. So Jeff Vanderplank has asked, is it necessary to go through a single group bank account to collect subs? In my group, sorry, let me finish. In my group, each section has a separate account which ultimately gets consolidated for main group accounts.
No, in that scenario, you would need a different, if you're using GoCardless in conjunction with OSM, you would need a different GoCardless account per section. Each GoCardless account maps onto one bank account. So again, that's a good example of the fact that we all operate differently. You know, some groups pay everything into one account. Some will have half a dozen accounts. Each section will have one for subs, one for events. You'll need as many GoCardless accounts as you have bank accounts that you wish to receive funds into via the system.
Excellent. Now there's another question that's sort of has been answered in the chat, but actually I wonder if you could pick up on it about staged activity badges and sharing the information across, like the stock of badges across sections. It seems that that's possible to do. Is it easy to explain how that works?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, if you have several sections that share the same stock of badges, yes, you can do that. That is fairly easy. When it comes to badge stock sharing, the only thing that you have to be aware of as a limitation, there's only one badge that you can't share in that way, and that's the membership badge. It's an anomaly of the system because of the fact, although it's the same physical purple round badge in all of the sections, the requirements are different in each section, Beavers, Cubs, Scouts, Explorers. So you can't actually share it in that way. So again, that's something that a little problem that people run into. There isn't an easy workaround for that at the moment. You just have to live with the fact that you might need multiple piles of membership badges. Yeah, I don't personally use the badge stock sharing feature, so I'm probably not the best person to explain it, but it can be done. I think Andrew might just be demonstrating that for us now. He's holding up a tablet to the screen. Yeah, it can be done for sure.
Excellent. Steve Hewitt is asking a question. I don't think it's fair to ask you necessarily, but is OSM going to be made compulsory? I don't believe it is. I'm saying that as my role as County Commissioner. Richard Williams, can you nod, or Terry? Either of you got a comment?
It's not
We
going to
believe
be
there's a
made compulsory
partnership.
anytime soon.
Yeah,
sorry, can you repeat that, Richard?
Likewise, that's my understanding, but no inside knowledge particularly. But no, and I don't think it's really in anyone's interests, and I think it's unlikely to happen.
Thank you. Oh, there's more coming in. Sam's asked a question. Could you explain the chat room and parent portal in more detail? How can we share photos from events, GIFs, etc.?
Okay, that's probably a more involved question than there's time to do justice to right now. But I think certainly if you look on the OSM Facebook page, and possibly if you look in OSM, go to the help menu and then tutorial videos, there should be a video in there that gives you an introduction to the chat rooms feature. And it's a difficult one to explain because it's something that can be used in lots of different ways. You can customize the audience for each chat room. And we did have a bit of a discussion about whether chat rooms was the right name for it, but I suggest looking at the video on that. It's a bit too involved to go into now.
Thank you. This is the last one as it stands for now. Are there any plans for an interface between D&V and OSM? Another good question.
I haven't heard anything of that sort, and I would have thought that would be of kind of fairly limited usefulness. But yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of people will, be tracking Platinum and Diamond and QSA and D&V stuff in tandem. But yeah, I don't think there's much prospect of there being anything joined up officially across those. But I might be wrong, but I don't think so.
Fantastic. Anyone else got any more questions that they would like to ask? Feel free to put them in the chat or put your hand up if you want to ask something. If not, well, while we're waiting for any more, James, can I say a big thank you to you for putting this together? I can see people applauding. I know, James, because you've told me that you are often on the Facebook OSM group and responding to people. So if people have got questions, I can probably catch hold of you through that, I guess. And James, we're sharing the presentation through a shared portal later, so you'll be okay if we can share your presentation later? Great. Okay, well, there are no more questions coming through, so thank you all for your time.